Hello and welcome to The World Today. With me in the studio is Thomas Frank, distinguished American radical journalist whose books, Pity the Billionaire and especially What's the Matter with Kansas, had a huge impact on thinking in the United States, especially at these times when the mainstream press effectively is in hock either to the corporations or the political class. Tom, welcome and congratulations on your new book. But before we turn to the book, which we will discuss in detail, what is your opinion on what's going on in the States? I mean, the fact it appears, I mean, it seems obvious, but one can never be sure that Trump is going to lose. And yet, he is the person all over the world, Europe, Africa, Asia, on whom attention is focused, whereas Senator Clinton or Secretary Clinton is virtually ignored. People know who she is, they don't like her or they like her, whatever the reasons, but Trump is the one on whom attention is concentrated. Yeah. Why?
So if you go to the Washington Post at any time, I live in the suburbs of Washington, so that's my hometown newspaper now, and if you go to their website, on virtually any day for the last, 6 months, all of the top 5 most read, most emailed stories are going to be about Trump. People are absolutely obsessed with this man. I think there's a horror of him. People can't believe this is happening, But I think the kind of people that I live around, the people who read Washington Post, the people all over the world who follow American politics are just horrified, and it's only accelerated. So it's my metaphor is like this is how many icebergs does this Titanic have to hit before it goes down? I mean, he's had blunder after blunder after blunder, and he's basically shot all his toes off. He's down to 1 or 2.
He still keeps going.
He still keeps going. He says he's not going to withdraw. People are going to vote for him. He's going to carry some states, which is unthinkable. He's this kind of moral monster to all appearances who's going to carry some states. And so I think that's why people are obsessed. Yeah.
And so you're pretty sure, Tom, that Trump will be defeated.
I don't see how this latest videotape that's emerged, I don't see how he recovers from that. Women are 50% of the population, and it's deeply offensive to them. So even though, look, yes, he's going to lose. There's never been a more perfect example of the failures of the two-party system. That in the Democratic primary, they had a robust challenge from Bernie Sanders, and then there were other Democrats waiting in the wings who should have been in the race. But the Democratic Party, the machinery of the party, the office holders within the party came together to ensure, first, that Sanders lost, and second, that no other strong challengers to Clinton would emerge. They gave her the nomination because it's her turn. And now she's going to win the presidency because of the weakness of her challenger. This is democracy in action in the world's greatest democracy,
Exactly. And also, the other odd fact, which I don't think has ever happened before, is virtually the entire Republican establishment has come out publicly and said that they're voting for Hillary.
Yeah, and they're opposing their own nominee. Yes, that's right.
I mean, that hasn't happened before, has
No,
it?
that never has. There's a lot of unprecedented things that are happening because of Trump. But a lot of them came out against him even before this latest outrage.
Last question. You wake up the morning after Election Day in the US, and despite everything you think and what the polls are showing, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Will anything change?
Well, yeah, I'll be moving into your guest room. Yes, I mean, if Trump were president, oh my God.
Fidel Castro, the leader of revolutionary Cuba, died on the 26th of November 2016 at the age of 90. In a long and rich life, he had transformed his own island and, in fact, the rest of South America. In times to come, historians will estimate his real impact on his own continent and the rest of the world. When did it all start? On the 26th of July, 1953, Fidel Castro, then an angry young lawyer, led a small band of armed men in an attempt to seize the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba in Oriente province. Most of the guerrillas were killed. Castro was tried and defended himself with a masterly speech, replete with classical references and quotations from Balzac and Rousseau, that ended with the words, "Condemn me, it does not matter. History will absolve me." This won him both notoriety and popularity. Released in an amnesty in 1954, Fidel Castro left the island and began to organize a rebellion in Mexico. For a time, he stayed in the hacienda that had once belonged to the legendary Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata. In 1956, 82 people, including Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, set sail from Mexico in a tiny vessel called Granma and headed for the impenetrable forested hills of the Sierra Maestra in Oriente province. Ambushed by soldiers belonging to the Batista dictatorship after they had landed, 12 survivors reached the Sierra Maestra and began the guerrilla war. They were backed by a strong urban network of students, workers, public employees, many others who became the backbone of the 26th of July movement. And the movement grew from strength to strength. News of their exploits spread throughout the island and in the big neighbor towards the north. The New York Times got interested, dispatching its legendary correspondent Herbert Matthews to see who these guys with beards and guns were like. By 1958, the guerrilla armies of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and Camilo Cienfuegos and Raul Castro and many others began to move from the mountains to the plains. A column led by Fidel began to take towns in Oriente, while Che Guevara's irregulars stormed and took the central Cuban city of Santa Clara. The day after, Batista and his mafia chums fled the island as the rebel army, now greeted as liberators, marched across the island into Havana. The popularity of the revolution was there for all to see. Castro's victory stunned the Americas. It soon became obvious that this was no ordinary event. Any doubts as to the revolution's intentions were dispelled by the first declaration of Havana. This was Fidel Castro's declaration of total independence from the United States, made in public before 1 million people in Revolution Square. Hello and welcome to The World Today. We have in the studio with us George Kerevan, Member of Parliament for the Scottish National Party, long-standing socialist, defender of Scottish independence for many, many years, and who has been playing a major role as a public intellectual even when he wasn't in Parliament. George, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for calling me a socialist. I think it's a word we have to revive.
I agree. We seem to be in a critical situation. Nicola Sturgeon, the leader of the SNP, has called for a second referendum, which has created panic in Whitehall. They don't know exactly how to deal with it. So there's a mixture of bluster and blackmail taking place at the moment. Why do you think, George, explain to our viewers why this question has come up so quickly again, clearly to do with Brexit?
It's the result of Brexit. We'd put in our manifesto for the elections to the Scottish Parliament last year, May 2016, that if there was a material change in the circumstances between Scotland and England, such as England voting to come out of Europe, then that would trigger a second referendum for Scottish independence. So we have a clear mandate. And I always like to point out, it's not just the Scottish National Party, there are other parties that support independence in Scotland, including the Green Party, and it will be the votes of both the SNP and the Greens that will give a Scottish Parliament call for a second Scottish referendum on independence.
Whereas the Conservative Party and the Labour Party in Scotland are going to vote against even having a referendum. They can vote against independence, which they will do, but voting even against having a referendum. How do you explain?
This is true, and it's particularly sad for the Labour Party. I mean, Labour in Scotland is now down to 15% in the polls. It's way behind even the Tory party in Scotland because most of the left votes have moved away to SNP and Greens and so on.
The argument being put forward at the moment in the mainstream media is that given that 1/3 of SNP supporters voted for Brexit in Scotland, the notion that they would win an independence referendum at the moment is not on, because those who voted for Brexit, why should they vote for an independent Scotland inside the EU?
I certainly admit that a proportion of SNP and yes voters, yes to independence, voted for Brexit, voted against the current state of Europe. Just how many is still a matter of debate, but we'll accept that. But I'd also point out that the city in the UK which voted heaviest to stay in Europe in the June 2016 Brexit referendum was Glasgow, which is the most working class city in the UK. So it's not quite as simple as saying that there's a large number of traditional SNP voters wanted to leave Europe. The SNP the referendum vote on independence is designed to give people a choice. And even those people who are against the present form of Europe, what we'd say to them is, well, you're not going to get much of an option if you stay with the UK and get a very hard WTO rules Brexit where Britain is just marooned and sailing in the wake of Trump's America. I think that Scottish independence and Catalan independence, because the people of Catalonia are also seeking an independence referendum, if we create some new centre-left anti-austerity nations within Europe, we have the best chance of transforming Europe. And I think most members of the SNP are critical of the form that the present European Union takes. And the best option to changing it is to create new countries, anti-austerity, support anti-austerity within the European system. So, and I think we can do that. I think we can change the balance of forces within Europe.
Good evening and welcome to The World Today. The single most important country politically and economically in Europe is Germany, and increasingly the German Republic is seen in the United States and China as the dominating factor in European politics. With me is Professor Wolfgang Streeck, Director of the Planck Institute in Cologne and Professor of Sociology at Cologne University, who writes about his own country as well as Europe and increasingly the rest of the world. Professor Streeck, welcome.
Thank you.
What is your assessment of German politics today? I mean, we have had almost continuously, not the whole time, a coalition government, which is like an institutionalized center government, which more or less has a consensus to which they've kept, and which is still the case as we speak. The Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats are in one government, which is slightly strange. And is this going to continue indefinitely, or can the Social Democrats, do you think, break from this pattern and move in some other direction?
I don't think, Tariq, we can make any guesses on the future these days. It's such a turbulent situation. Anything can happen. The reason why see, Germany is a country of grand coalitions, as you say. We had considerable polarization between the parties in the 1970s. Unification sort of forced them together. It was a national thing. In any case, I think you have to add to this that we have a federal structure. Yeah. It makes for, in good times, it makes for high predictability of policy. In bad times, it makes for a lack of flexibility, originality, and so on.
But Germany, by and large, with the exception of the reunification, which of course destabilized the country, has been run quite smoothly by its ruling class, or whatever you want to call them, till now. Now, even before the crisis over the refugees, there was real unease. The growth of the right and the alternative so quickly and suddenly took everyone by surprise that we then wondered what the hell is going on in this country, that for so long they have appeared to be smooth and suddenly these rough edges are beginning to show. And what is the likely consequence of that? Nothing to do with Hitler or the Third Reich or anything. This is, only idiots talk like that. But given what Germany has been, why is this happening now? Is it simply the refugees or immigration, two related but different problems, or is it something else too?
Of course, there's commonalities and there is specificity, so to speak. We have seen that in all the major Western democracies as a result of the opening up of these societies, the globalization process, free trade, and so on. We see sort of resistance among the losers of globalization in cultural terms as well as in economic terms. And I think, as we said before, an increase in electoral turnout as a result of dissatisfaction accumulating in certain regions and so on. This is similar. There is something specific about the German situation, which is this big taboo about the nation. Germany, to simplify a little bit, the German cultural consensus after the Second World War was that there is not supposed to be a German nation. Germany is sort of disappearing into a united Europe. And the ideal position would be for nations generally, so losing their significance, disappearing, and integrating into something that is, and in a sort of way, sometimes as a joke I say, if you meet someone outside Germany, you want to find out where he comes from, and you ask where you come from, and he says, I'm a European, then you know he's a German, because nobody else would say that. You would say, I'm from England, I'm from France, but a German will say, I'm from Europe. In a sense, a denial of the sort of national history and the national character. Now, after unification, this became more difficult.
Wolfgang, this is fascinating. To return and to conclude, I know it's very difficult to predict, but what do you think is going to happen in the next German elections?
As I said,
impossible.
I don't want to make, but we can look at the broad parameters. Now, in my view, in the end, the relationship between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats
will be there.
Numerically, it will not change much.
No. So the center isn't going to break.
No, the center is going to shrink, but it is not going to break. And depending on what happens in the next 3 or 4 months, in the French election, in terms of refugee policy, in terms of the United States, I mean, with Trump, anything can happen any day. So uncertainty or catastrophe or whatever always benefits the incumbent. And Angela Merkel may be on her way back. But it could also be quite the other way around. We get another refugee crisis, although I think she is completely determined not to let any individual refugee anymore into Germany before.
She's now stopped completely.
Oh yeah, no,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, no. It's all deportations, not invitation.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of The World Today. With me in the studio, our improvised studio in the Bolivar Hall in London, is Anabel Hernandez, the author of Narcoland, one of the best studies of the drug cartels and their links with politicians and bad politics in Mexico City. She is a distinguished journalist and an extremely courageous one, because to write about these problems in Mexico often leads to death. So we are very happy to have you with us, Anabel, in the studio. Before we begin to discuss other things, let's discuss the journalist who was killed not so long ago. Who was he? What is the story? Because the coverage in the media in the West has been very limited, as you can imagine.
Well, Javier Valdez was a very close friend of me. He was covering the issues about drug trafficking and members of the government involved with drug trafficking since many years ago. He started also to publish some books about these issues. And he was living in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa. This place, as you know, is one state that produces most of the marijuana and heroin that travel across the border to the consumers in the United States. And in this state, Sinaloa have been born the most dangerous and powerful drug lords in Mexico, like El Chapo Guzman, who is the most famous. So my colleague was covering in the last weeks one war that is inside the Sinaloa cartel after the arrest and the extradition of Joaquin Guzman Loera, El Chapo Guzman, who was the head of the cartel. As you know, just at the beginning of this year, he was extradited to United States, and Javier was covering this. Sadly, May 15, he was murdered at noon in front of everyone in Culiacan. He received 12 shots.
There were 12 shots fired.
Yes, 12, just in the street. And now the government is trying to say that was because someone tried to steal his car. But of course, this is not possible, because even in Culiacan, that is a very dangerous place, no one shoot to anyone 12 times to steal a car. So for me, it's very clear that to be able to kill one journalist as famous, as important as Javier Valdez, someone of the government gave the permission to do it. And this is very dangerous because, as you know, Mexico is one of the most dangerous places to be a journalist. Just this year, 6 journalists have been murdered, more than 100 in the last decade. And all these crimes are impugned because These journalists not just have been murdered by members of the cartels. In most of the cases, is involved directly members of the government, municipal government, state government, or the federal government. And I think is the case of Javier Valdez.
When you speak in the United States and point out to people in the US that their government is involved, that their agencies are involved, what is the response? Surprise? Don't they know it? Or how do they react to what you've said?
They don't say anything. Of course, they cannot deny it because, I mean, I have the indictments in different courts, opened in different courts, United States, that shows this information. For example, I repeat, that shows that many of the American banks launder the money of these cartels. I mean, that is a fact.
Yes.
That is a fact, but no one said nothing. And it's very sad. And no one really wants to do nothing. I mean, the corruption is everywhere. This money is buying the conscience of many people in the world. And no one talks about it.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The World Today. My guest is Karma Nabulsi, who is a Palestinian activist of long standing, an academic, an essayist, and teaches politics at St. Edmund's Hall in Oxford. Karma has been one of the most courageous voices in recent months, speaking up against the surveillance and semi-spying operations carried out by the British government under the title of Prevent, the notion being that spying and surveillance and getting information regarding Muslim families will somehow magically deal with the problem of terrorism, which of course has been tried before with other ethnic minorities, the Irish during the Irish Troubles, and has never worked. Nothing has worked except a political solution of some sort. Karma, the Palestinian movement, the Palestinian people, the Palestinian organizations have been through more hardships in a certain sense than almost any other national liberation movement I know. I mean, if you just look at it chronologically, from 1948 to 2017, where we now are, the attacks, the sustained denunciations of the Palestinians, the killings, the murders, the checkpoints. And yet, in a way, despite all the problems, the people, the Palestinian people haven't given up. I don't now speak about the leaderships. Oh, no. I talk about the ordinary people. They have not given up, but they fight against terrible odds.
You know, our people are young. I always say our leaders are old, and we don't really have a national liberation movement anymore in that sense. I would say since 1982, really.
Yes.
Since the comprehensive destruction and the invasion of 82. But our people are young. You know, the majority of our people are under the age of 20. And we are a people outside of just the West Bank and Gaza, which is what they'd like to reduce us to. So we have the majority of our people being a refugee people are outside Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, across the world, Chile. You know, in Latin America, we have a great many Palestinians. But our people haven't given up. They are absolutely strong on the two principles. I would say there's only two principles. One is liberation of the land, and the other is the return to that land from which we were expelled in 48. So these two principles means that the young people I meet, you know, you can get very depressed looking at the PA in Ramallah and the gruesome behavior, which doesn't help. You know, whatever they do, it doesn't really help. But if you meet our young generation, it's so encouraging because their hearts are on fire. They're the same like I was when I was young. They're as committed to the principles of those liberation and return.